The former US ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker, joins us now for more on a NATO summit which is expected to be like no other. For the record, Ambassador Volker also served as the US Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations. And welcome back to CNN Newsroom. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, so this is not your father's NATO. This isn't even your NATO. This is a NATO with renewed energy, commitment. But in a recent op-ed, you made the case that there is a danger in this newfound unity in purpose, in that Ukraine could actually be left hung out to dry in a way. I mean, that's a very broad summary, possibly a little bit too broad, but lay out how you think this could still go all south for the Ukrainians.
Right. So what NATO has done exceptionally well is to demonstrate unity of purpose among the allies for collective defense of NATO territory. The Baltic states, Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, NATO has been very clear that any attack on any NATO country will be met with the full force of NATO. But by saying that, what that does is it leaves a country like Ukraine or Moldova or Georgia in limbo. What about them? There is no actual Russian threat or attack against NATO territory today. Of course, we want to prevent that. But there is an ongoing Russian attack against Ukraine and potentially also against Moldova or others. So what is NATO going to do about that? And if the answer is nothing, then that's a green light to Russia. So this is where the difficult part is for these NATO leaders meeting on Thursday. What do they say meaningfully about Ukraine? What do they do to help Ukraine? What kind of warnings can they give to Vladimir Putin?
Yeah, a week ago, when Ukraine's president addressed lawmakers in Berlin, he used Germany's own past to highlight the crisis in his country. Here he is, and he begins by referencing the number of years since the end of the Second World War.
80 years later, I address all of you who heard politicians say every year, never again. But I can see these words are worth nothing. Now, a whole nation is being exterminated in Europe.
Never again, a promise to prevent all forms of genocide now and forever. So what does that actually look like for NATO when it comes to Ukraine? How do they ensure that never again, they stick to it?
Right. Well, that is the issue of the day. And I think President Zelensky put his finger right on it. There is a legal obligation of NATO to protect its members, and that's good, and that's being met. There is a moral obligation of those of us in the West not to allow further holocausts, further genocides, further extermination of countries, such as we saw during World War II. That is happening now with Ukraine. And so where is NATO in meeting this moral obligation? That's the dilemma. We don't want to start World War III. We don't want to expand the war. I don't think anyone is arguing for that. But the flip side is if you don't do something, if you don't risk something, then you are seeing this never again moment repeat itself. And I think that's a shame on all of us.
Well, in terms of the bigger picture and what's at stake beyond Ukraine, the UK Foreign Secretary Liz Truss wrote this for the Financial Times. Our response is not just aimed at deterring Putin's territorial ambitions, but also showing other potential hostile states how we deal with threats. We cannot allow any authoritarian to think their aggression will go unchallenged. So how much pain needs to be inflicted on Russia and Putin to make any future wannabe Stalin think twice?
Right. Well, I think what we're doing actually is a good strategy. That is to say, we are hitting Russia with unprecedented sanctions that are going to hit the economy incredibly hard. Russia will never be the same after this for decades and decades. And at the same time, we're helping the Ukrainians to defend themselves. They've stalemated Russia's military in Ukraine, and they are forcing Russia to consider what their next steps are. All of that is a good strategy so far. But as you point out, other dictators, whether it's Xi in China or in Iran or in North Korea, they're watching to see how does this play out. What's critically important now is that Putin is not allowed to succeed. Putin does not succeed in exterminating Ukraine as a country, and Putin is forced to reckon with the damage that he has inflicted on his own country. That is critical for all of these other dictators, and we are still in the balance now. We are not out of this. We still have to do more.
What about the flip side of the coin here, supporting Ukraine with defence shipments? That's important and crucial. But on the other side, why not announce a type of Marshall Plan to rebuild the country once this is over, to send a message that NATO and Western support is there for the long term?
Yes, I think this is essential as well. The first thing we need is for Ukraine to survive as a sovereign and independent state. And I do believe that's something that NATO should state at its meeting on Thursday, that Ukraine's survival is a NATO interest. And then once the war is over, we are going to have to help to rebuild Ukraine. We do need a Marshall Plan of sorts for Ukraine. Certainly, there will be some seized Russian assets that can contribute to that, but that won't be enough. It's got to be a project of the West to then help rebuild Ukraine economically, politically, and ensure that it is never threatened again. So we have to start looking at security arrangements and its relationship with Euro-Atlantic institutions such as the EU.
Ambassador Volker, thank you so much. We appreciate your time, your insights, and your experience. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for having me.